In the spring of 2020, 18,000 organizations around the world downloaded a routine software update. It came from SolarWinds, a Texas-based company that makes network management software. The update was called Orion 2020.2. It fixed bugs, improved performance. Customers had been downloading SolarWinds updates for years without incident. This one was different. Hidden inside that update was 4,000 lines of code that nobody at SolarWinds had written. It had been placed there by Russian intelligence. And by the time anyone realized it, Russia had been inside the Pentagon, the NSA, the Treasury Department, the State Department, and the Department of Homeland Security for up to 14 months. Not one government alert had fired. SolarWinds Orion is not a consumer product. It is the software that the U.S. federal government uses to monitor and manage its own computer networks to see what is happening inside its systems in real time. In 2020, SolarWinds had approximately 33,000 customers worldwide. Among them, all 5 branches of the U.S. military, the NSA, the FBI, the Treasury Department, the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, and the White House. Also, Microsoft, Intel, Cisco, and 425 of the Fortune 500. Orion was, in other words, not just a window into corporate networks. It was the window through which the U.S. government watched itself. When the SVR hid its code inside the Orion update, it was not simply breaking into those networks. It was turning the U.S. government's own monitoring infrastructure into the access point. The tool built to detect intrusions became the intrusion, and for 14 months, no system in the United States government saw it. Kevin Mandia had spent 25 years investigating the most sophisticated cyber attacks in history. He founded Mandiant, the firm that identified the Chinese military unit behind years of systematic U.S. corporate espionage. He had been in rooms where the damage from state-sponsored hacking was laid out in full. In early December 2020, a security alert appeared in FireEye's own systems. A new phone had been registered to a legitimate employee's account, a second device, enrolling in the company's multi-factor authentication system. The employee it was registered to had not registered a new phone. It was a minor flag, what investigators call a severity 0 alert, the kind of thing that gets reviewed and closed dozens of times a day. Mandia's team pulled the thread. Every forensic log they examined, every packet capture, every endpoint the trail kept leading back to one system, the server running SolarWinds Orion. They decompiled the Orion update. They found 4,000 lines of code that should not have been there. Mandia later said, "Based on my 25 years in cybersecurity, I've concluded we are witnessing an attack by a nation with top-tier offensive capabilities. This attack is different from the tens of thousands of incidents we have responded to throughout the years." He drove to Fort Meade himself. Here is what everyone assumes about U.S. government cybersecurity. It is impenetrable. The NSA monitors the most classified networks on Earth. The Department of Homeland Security runs a national detection system called Einstein, specifically designed to catch exactly this kind of foreign intrusion. The government spends billions of dollars annually defending these systems. But here is what the record shows. Einstein, the DHS National Intrusion Detection System, missed the SolarWinds attack entirely. The reason? Einstein was designed to detect malware arriving from known threat signatures and foreign IP addresses. The SVR had anticipated this. They rented their command and control servers from Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and GoDaddy commercial US providers with US IP addresses. Einstein was looking for foreign traffic. The traffic looked domestic. The NSA, the most sophisticated signals intelligence agency in the world, ran SolarWinds Orion on its own network. Its own monitoring systems were compromised by the same update it had received and trusted. The NSA did not detect the intrusion in its own systems. FireEye told them. The entire national cybersecurity architecture had one shared assumption built into it. The software you download from a trusted vendor is clean. The SVR understood that assumption, and they attacked it at the source. If you're finding this story as difficult to believe as I did, hit subscribe. We cover the stories that were buried, classified, or deliberately forgotten. New file every week. Now, back to the story. The SVR did not break into the Pentagon. They did not try to crack classified government encryption. They went somewhere far more vulnerable and far more consequential. In September 2019, they accessed SolarWinds' internal software build environment. This is the system where Orion's source code is assembled into a finished product before being digitally signed and distributed to customers. A build environment is not a network perimeter. It is the inside of a trusted factory. They began with a test. In October 2019, they injected a small piece of benign code into the build pipeline, not malware, just a probe to confirm they could do it. They watched to see if anything was detected. Nothing was. They removed the test code. They waited. On February 20, 2020, they deployed Sunburst, the operational malware. It was inserted into a single DLL file within Orion's codebase, a file called SolarWinds Orion Core Business Layer.dll. The malicious code was written to look like legitimate SolarWinds code in structure and style. It used the same naming conventions, the same coding patterns. Security analysts, who later examined it, described the craftsmanship as exceptional. On March 26, 2020, SolarWinds shipped Orion version 2020.2 to its customers as a standard update. The update was digitally signed with SolarWinds' own certificate, the cryptographic proof that a file is exactly what it claims to be, from exactly who it claims to be from. The certificate was legitimate, because SolarWinds had signed it themselves without knowing what was inside. Sunburst was not a blunt instrument. It was designed specifically to avoid detection by every known security tool in use at its target organizations. After installation, it did nothing for 12 to 14 days. It ran dormant, checking its environment. It was programmed to scan for the presence of specific security software. If it found tools from certain cybersecurity vendors on the infected machine, it shut itself down permanently. If it detected signs that it was running in a security researcher's sandbox, it terminated. It only activated if it was confident it was inside a real, unmonitored target. Once active, it established contact with its command and control servers using a protocol designed to mimic legitimate Orion traffic. Orion was a network monitoring tool. It generated regular outbound communications as part of its normal function. Sunburst hid its own traffic inside those communications. To any monitoring system watching the network, it looked like Orion doing its job. The command servers it contacted were hosted on Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and GoDaddy, U.S. commercial infrastructure. The traffic came from U.S. IP addresses. Every network security system, looking for foreign intrusion traffic, saw nothing foreign. For each organization it infected, Sunburst generated a unique subdomain for communications, a specific string derived from the victim's own network environment. This meant that, even if one organization's traffic was flagged, the indicator could not be used to identify other victims. Every target looked different from the outside. Microsoft's president Brad Smith later testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee that his researchers believed at least 1,000 highly skilled engineers had worked on the SolarWinds operation. It was, he said, the largest and most sophisticated attack his company had ever analyzed. The SVR did not attempt to access every system in every organization that downloaded the infected update. Of the 18,000 organizations that received Sunburst, investigators later identified approximately 100 that were specifically targeted for deeper intrusion. This precision was itself a signature. In the post-breach forensic analysis, investigators noticed that the attackers had used a specific credential, the exact right username and password for every account they accessed. Not a master key, not a brute force approach. The correct credential, every time, for every system they entered. Kevin Mandia testified, what they were doing was using the exact right credential for everything they went into. That's discipline, that's training, that's methodical, and I don't see any nation doing that other than Russia. At the Treasury Department, dozens of email accounts belonging to senior officials were compromised, including accounts in the offices responsible for international economic policy and sanctions. At the State Department, email systems were accessed. At the Department of Homeland Security, the agency responsible for protecting U.S. networks from exactly this kind of attack systems were breached. At the NSA, which ran Orion on its own internal systems, investigators were unable to publicly confirm the full extent of what was accessed. The NSA has not disclosed this. In June 2020, 3 months after the infected update began shipping, the SVR removed Sunburst from SolarWinds' own build environment. They no longer needed the insertion point. They were already inside. The trigger was a phone. In early December 2020, someone had enrolled a new device in FireEye's multi-factor authentication system using the credentials of a legitimate FireEye employee. The employee was contacted and asked if they had registered a new phone. They had not. This was not an alert about SolarWinds. It was not an alert about the US government. It was a routine access anomaly at a private cybersecurity company, the kind of flag that gets generated and closed hundreds of times a week across corporate America. FireEye's investigators pulled the thread because that is what FireEye does. They traced the attacker's access backwards through their network. Every forensic path led to the same place, the server running SolarWinds Orion. They decompiled the update. They found the Sunburst code. On December 8, 2020, Kevin Mandia posted publicly that FireEye had been breached by a nation-state actor. He mentioned the theft of FireEye's Red Team tools. He did not yet mention SolarWinds. 5 days later, On December 13, FireEye confirmed what they had found inside the Orion update. They named it Sunburst. They published technical indicators to help other organizations check whether they were compromised. They contacted SolarWinds. They contacted the NSA. The NSA, which ran the software on its own systems, had not known. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency issued an emergency directive within hours, ordering every federal agency to immediately disconnect SolarWinds Orion from their networks. The operation had been running for 14 months. Just before Thanksgiving, 20 weeks before the public disclosure, Kevin Mandia made a rare in-person visit to NSA headquarters at Fort Meade. He had gone directly to NSA Director General Paul Nakasone. He laid out what FireEye had found. He said, "In my gut, very early on I felt that it was a Russian foreign intelligence operation. I kept thinking it's not just us. In my mind I was thinking, we're locked onto it right now, and I know we're not victim one, and I'm not hearing anything from anyone. What the hell is this?" Nakasone later publicly acknowledged the visit. He said the information Mandia shared allowed the NSA to corroborate details of the attack and identify the vulnerability at its root. He said that because of Mandia's contact, the duration of the active operation was shortened and deeper breaches were thwarted. He also said something more significant. He called the SolarWinds incident the turning point for the nation. Not a setback, not a failure to be managed, a turning point. Because what it had demonstrated definitively, at scale, with 14 months of undetected presence, was that the assumption the entire US government cybersecurity architecture was built on was wrong. You could not defend the network perimeter if the threat came through a trusted software update from inside it. In February 2021, the CEOs of FireEye, Microsoft, SolarWinds, and CrowdStrike testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee. It was one of the most technically substantive congressional hearings on cybersecurity in US history. Brad Smith told senators that Microsoft's researchers believed at least 1,000 highly skilled engineers had worked on the SolarWinds operation. He called it the largest and most sophisticated attack his company had ever seen. Sudhakar Ramakrishna, the new SolarWinds CEO who had taken over just after the breach was discovered, testified about the company's security posture. Among the details that emerged, in 2019, a security researcher had warned SolarWinds that their FTP server was accessible with a password that had been publicly posted online. The password was SolarWinds123. A former intern had posted it on a public code repository. It had been removed, but the warning had not triggered a comprehensive security review. This was not how the attackers entered. The SVR used a far more sophisticated approach. But the detail became a symbol of the gap between the security posture of a company trusted by the most sensitive networks in the world and what those networks actually required. The full extent of what the SVR accessed during 14 months inside US government networks has never been publicly disclosed. Intelligence officials have described the operation as primarily espionage, the collection of emails, internal documents, diplomatic communications, intelligence assessments, what was read, what was copied, what is now known by Russian intelligence. That accounting has not been made public. It may never be. The SolarWinds operation did not exploit a zero-day vulnerability in classified software. It did not require a mole inside a government agency. It did not need to crack military-grade encryption. It exploited the one thing the entire security architecture of the modern internet is built on: trust in software updates. Every organization that downloaded the Orion update did exactly what they were supposed to do. They ran a legitimate update from a trusted vendor, digitally signed with a valid certificate, distributed through official channels. Every security check passed. Every verification succeeded. Because everything was exactly what it claimed to be, except for 4,000 lines of hidden code that nobody at SolarWinds knew were there. In April 2021, the Biden administration formally attributed the operation to Russia's SVR and issued sanctions against Russian intelligence-linked companies and 32 individuals. Russia denied involvement. After the operation was exposed, the US government spent $750 million on emergency remediation and rebuilding compromised systems. Congress passed the largest cybersecurity investment in federal history. Executive orders were issued mandating new software security standards for any vendor doing business with the government. 12 separate federal agencies overhauled their approach to software procurement, network monitoring, and vendor trust. The entire concept of a trusted update had to be reevaluated from the ground up. All of it because of a software update that 18,000 organizations downloaded on a Tuesday morning in spring 2020. And because one private company noticed a phone that shouldn't have been there. The SVR's operation is now studied in every major cybersecurity program in the world. It is referred to simply as SolarWinds, a proper noun that now means something specific in the language of intelligence and security. SolarWinds, the company, survived. It spent years and hundreds of millions of dollars rebuilding its security architecture and its reputation. In 2023, the SEC sued SolarWinds and its chief security officer for fraud, alleging they had misled investors about the company's cybersecurity posture before the breach. The case was later dropped. The 18,000 organizations that downloaded the infected update have been patched. The backdoors have been closed. The known compromised systems have been rebuilt. What was read during 14 months inside the most sensitive networks in the United States that has never been disclosed? The SVR knows what it found. The US government does not know exactly what was taken. That asymmetry has never been corrected. If this changed how you see the infrastructure you trust every day, share it with someone who thinks the government's networks are safe. Subscribe for the next file. It drops next week.